just to conclude with that, maybe it's very rare to write a whole poem in anapest meter also, because it's not very natural sounding. I said the iambic line sounds sounds natural to the ear, even before you start to take it apart and analyze how it's structured. An anapestic line does not. We don't speak ta 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 ta. It does not imitate the natural rhythms of English speech. If you're in a poem that's written entirely in anapestic measure, the example that often gets cited is Edgar Allan Poe's poem Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. Okay, so there are variants within that verse, but Poe is playing with an anapestic meter as the standard metrical unit in Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. Doesn't sound very natural, even if I just quote one line of the poem. So you can see the way in which that metrical foot works, and you can see why it's more often used as a variant within an iambic metrical structure than as the basis for writing an entire poem. All right, so that's enough of vocabulary on how we place accents in a line of English verse. All of the key vocabulary words are underlined. It's a question of focusing on stresses. It's a question of focusing on how stresses are related to the associated unstressed syllables. We need to be aware of the two major types of metrical feet, the iambic foot and the trochaic foot. We need to be aware of variants, and then we have two examples of variants, the spondy and the anapest. That vocabulary, I think, is all you need for this class, and it's a vocabulary that lets you begin thinking about the structure of English verse rhythms, the rhythms of English language in general, really, in the ways that you need to for the rest of your studies. So once we've determined what kind of a metrical foot we're using, the other question that we need to ask is, how many feet are there in each line? Okay, so you have an iambic line. You then need to say, okay, how many iambic feet do I have in that line? You might have 3, 4, 5, 6, and then based on the number of feet, you will have the length of the line. So Shakespeare is written, majority of Shakespeare is written in iambic pentameter, right? The iambic foot is the dominant metrical unit, and there are 5 feet in most of the lines of Shakespeare's plays, right? So iambic, that's the type of foot. Pentameter, that's the number of feet. And that's it, really. You need to know to identify the kind of metrical unit that's being used, and then you need to know how to say how many of them are being used in each line. So if there are 3 feet, you have a trimeter. You have 4 feet, you have a tetrameter. 5 feet, you have a pentameter. 6 feet, you have a hexameter. 7 feet, you have a bad poem, right? You don't very commonly have less than 3 or more than 6 feet. 2 feet would be a dimeter, I guess. So, for example, when we read the Shakespeare sonnets, we'll see that they're written in an iambic pentameter meter. Blake's The Tiger, trochaic tetrameter, right? There are 4 feet in Blake's The Tiger. You see it at the top of the screen here. Even if there's a variant in the final foot. It's not because there's one unstressed syllable missing that we say there's not a 4th foot in that line. We have 4 feet, and the dominant metrical unit is tetrameter. So it's a poem that's written in trochaic tetrameter with a variant. Okay, and that's it. What kind of a metrical foot do we have? How many metrical feet are there in each line? The last thing to say is, right, like for each metrical foot, we can also have variants in a poem at the level of the line length. So a commonly used example of these types of variants that we have in the fascicule, is Herrick's poem, To the Virgins to Make Much of Time. In that poem, we alternate between tetrameter and trimeter. We have an iambic meter, iambic feet throughout the poem, but one line has 4 of them, the next line has 3. One line has 4, the next line has 3. So this variation at the level of line length is one of the characteristic features of Herrick's poem. And when you have variants of this kind, it's always worth, as a critical reader, it is always worth focusing on such variants and asking yourself the question, why, right? Why does the poet choose to vary the line length, right? Is it related to the sense, to the meaning of the poem that I'm interpreting or that I'm reading? And generally the answer is yes, right? The poet is trying to sculpt language into a meaningful shape. Each variant is intended to relay certain meanings, right? Otherwise, why vary the line length? So if we look at the Herrick poem in the fascicule, it's a poem about the need to take advantage of one's youth. And we alternate between 4-foot lines that state the beauty of one's youth, the beauty of the current state that Herrick finds in front of him and that he describes. And then the line that follows describes the passing of that beauty into old age, right? So, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, right? We're in the summer, we're gathering rosebuds. We can imagine the rosebuds representing youth and beauty. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, 4 syllables to describe that current summertime beauty of youth. Old time is still a flying, right? The transition, we are old, time is still a flying, 3 feet to imitate the passage of time. The present state, which seems to endure a little bit longer because we have 4 feet, and then we evoke the movement of time in a line that goes faster. And that same flower that blooms today, the line that follows, the blooming of the flower today, the present, tomorrow may be dying. 3 feet, we evoke tomorrow, the movement into the future, the speeding ahead of time. So we have a present which seems to endure in line 1 and in line 3. Tetrameter, 4 feet, to give a sense of this seeming length of the current situation. And then the lines that follow, lines 2 and lines 4 of that stanza, shorter, evoking movement, evoking the passage of time, the slipping away of youth, the arrival of old age, and ultimately death. Okay, so we have these variants 4-3, 4-3, which we need to notice when we analyze that poem. We'll say, okay, we have a poem which is an iambic meter and that alternates between tetrameter and trimeter, iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter. First paragraph on the review sheet that you see. And then the next logical step to take is to say why. The tetrameter imitates the present state, the illusion that this present state of beauty and youth is going to endure, and the trimeter imitates the passing away of that present into old age, into death. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, O time is still a flying, that same flower that blooms today, tomorrow will be dying. Okay? Length and then brevity. Length and then brevity. Okay. And finally, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by developing any further than what's on the page. We can also speak about free verse. When there is no regular metrical pattern or line length, then we say that a poem is written in free verse. We have the first example of that in the fascicule is Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. There you have it for rhythmic patterns. I spent a little bit more time on this than maybe some of you needed, because it's something that can seem intimidating when you look at it first, right? Having to place stresses in a line, this very technical vocabulary, trochaic, tetrameter, and so on. Really, there's not much vocabulary. When you think about it, it's relatively easy. And the more you think about it, the better you will get at using spoken English. It's not something that just matters to poetry. It's something that matters to hearing how a politician's speech is delivered, how an actor interprets a line in a film, how a song is sung, and so on, and so on, and so on. So it's something that really is generally useful, from public speaking to popular culture. And it's something that might seem difficult when you first confront it, but is really not that hard. Right? The vocabulary, sure, it's technical, but you've only got about 12 to 15 words there that you need to learn how to deal with. The more you practice, the better you get. Okay, in addition to rhythm, we also have to pay attention, obviously, to rhyme scheme. When we speak about a poem's rhyme scheme, just like in French, right, we're talking about the organization of the final sounds in each line. So we're talking about the end rhymes when we talk about a rhyme scheme. That's all that we'll talk about in this revision sheet. Of course, we need to be aware that we can also have rhymes that exist between words within lines, between words that are in the middle of lines that follow one another. So we can have internal rhymes, right? We'll come to these as we go through the poems in the fascicule. We always need to be alive to the multitude of sound patterns that we can have within the lines of each poem. But when we talk about the rhyme scheme, we're talking about the overall architecture of the poem, and we're talking about the organization of the final sounds in each line. Okay, that's the thing that matters. When we talk about a rhyme, traditionally we're talking about perfect rhymes. Right? Third paragraph on rhyme scheme. We're talking about a shared sound between the final vowel and any consonants that follow in two words. So a perfect rhyme, for example, in William Blake's The Tiger would be when he rhymes night with bright. Okay? Night, bright. The vowel sound is the same diphthong in each case, and we end with the T consonant sound, right? So phonetically, we have a perfect rhyme between the final vowel sound and the final consonant. Sometimes, as well, we can have what are called half rhymes. Sometimes you'll see these called imperfect rhymes or slant rhymes. Two words at the end of a rhyme, at the end of a line are similar, but not identical. So in Blake's The Tiger, for the most part, we have perfect rhymes, but we'll note that we also have an imperfect rhyme or a half rhyme between I and symmetry. Okay, I and symmetry. Right? In the rhyme scheme of Blake's poem, those words will be shown to rhyme with one another. But we need to be aware that it is not a perfect rhyme. So just like variance in meter, we need to ask ourselves, okay, why is that choice being made? Is it just because the poet couldn't find the rhyme that he or she wanted and had to make do with something that's less good? Generally not, right? Generally, half rhymes are part of the sculpting of language to give the poem the form that the artist desires. So here, for example, I will just leave it at the simple statement that this poem is a poem about opposites. Right? When we look at the tiger, we'll see it's a poem about opposites, day and night, the tiger and the lamb, God and the devil, heaven and hell. It's a poem that is about opposites and oppositions, metaphysical and natural oppositions. And yet, for the most part, these oppositions are dealt with in perfect rhymes, except at the one point in the poem where we should find symmetry. Okay? The imperfect rhyme is there at the moment where Blake is encouraging us to see a symmetry in the universal order. Okay? Make of that what you want, but you clearly have a half rhyme that evokes the ambiguity that is present in this poem and that pulls back against what the sense of that word is telling us. We're being told to look for symmetry, and yet we don't have a symmetry, a perfect symmetry at the level of the sound. Okay, so we have clearly a variant that offers us a way into the analysis of what's going on in this poem. So I'm just giving that as an example of the kinds of possibilities that are opened up in analysis of rhyme schemes. Key thing is to make a distinction between end rhymes and internal rhymes, to make a distinction between perfect rhymes or full rhymes and half rhymes or imperfect rhymes. All right. To conclude, let's just end with something that is quite easy and that gives us an obvious way into the first text in the fascicule. A few common rhyme schemes, right? How do you write out a rhyme scheme? You just assign a letter to each new rhyming sound in the poem. So if we start with a couplet that has two rhymes, right? Couplet, obviously, we would say AA for those first two rhymes. The next couplet that follows would be BB. Next one that follows would be CC. And then we just keep on going like that as long as the rhyme sounds keep changing, right? If we get back to the same rhyming sound as in lines 1 and 2, then we would write AA again. But otherwise, we just keep on going, new letters in the alphabet. So a couplet, AA, BB, CC, and so on. Other common rhyme schemes. Alternate rhyme. We shift from line 1 and 3 rhyme with one another. Lines 2 and 4 rhyme with one another, and so on. That is a alternate rhyme. AB, AB, CD, CD. And we could, depending on the structure of the poem, return to AB, AB, CD, CD, right, later in the verse. But we could also keep going, EF, EF, G, GH, GH, and so on and so on. So alternate rhyme, we're shifting from line one rhymes with line 3, 2 with 4. Right? We shift the rhyming sound in each subsequent line, but we then return to the sound of the line, the line that came before. The envelope or the enclosed rhymes, ABBA, CDDC, and so on. Same thing. We can always return to the ABBA sound if we choose. If we don't return to it, then we just keep on going with new letters. All right. A little bit more complicated, the sonnet form. In the sonnet form, we have a number of different types of sonnets, obviously. But the most common English form of the sonnet is what I've written out here on this revision sheet. We have three stanzas that are in alternate rhyme, 3 stanzas of alternate rhyme, and a final couplet. So we're putting together the vocabulary that we've just looked at to establish the entire form of the English sonnet. We have stanzas 1, 2, and 3, stanza strophe, right? We just take the word from Italian. Stanza is a strophe. 3 stanzas which are in alternate rhyme, AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and then we end with a final couplet, GG, GG, because, right, those are sounds that we have not seen before normally in the poem. So that's how you would map out the rhyme scheme of an English sonnet or a Shakespearean sonnet. And again, for the sonnet is a widely used form throughout Europe, so there are other ways of writing out the sonnet form. This is what we'll be studying in the fascicule, And this is the most common sonnet form in English because of Shakespeare's work to make it famous. One last thing to say about the structure of the sonnet, which will sort of bring us into the fascicule then. In the sonnet, typically you have a turn after the 8th line. Right? This is something that is present in the sonnet form throughout Europe. You have 8 lines presenting one view of a subject, and then you shift your perspective on the subject following line 8, and the 6 final lines look at that subject in a different way. So we have an 8-line presentation, and we have a turn after the 2nd stanza, after the 8th line. We shift our perspective on the subject, and then in the Shakespearean sonnet, the couplet typically provides a kind of resolution. So that's the basic structural form of the English sonnet. Okay, I hope it's useful that I read through this sheet for you. The idea is to really keep things as simple as possible. I'm not trying to overload people with vocabulary. And the idea is also to give you vocabulary which is useful to help you think about the works in the fascicule in constructive ways, and in constructive ways that you can also apply to other forms of linguistic production. Okay, so from here we're going to move into the poetry fascicule, and I'll go through the poetry fascicule, giving you pointers for how to read the poems that you'll find in there.